Platypus Reclayed is a fun shmup with a lovable aesthetic. As somebody with no attachment to the original game that debuted back in 2002, the second I laid eyes on this game's claymation art style, I found myself enamored with it and couldn't wait to play it for myself. However, after sinking my teeth into it, I found that this game was more than just its art style. It's a fun, approachable side-scrolling shooter that serves as a great introduction to this iconic genre without losing what makes it so beloved. See, I'm a fairly casual fan of shmups. I've played probably what most would consider staples of the genre: Gradius, Ikaruga, Radiant Silvergun, Super R-Type, etc. And I'm also a pretty big fan of rail shooters like Star Fox and Sin and Punishment. However, while I have a deep admiration for these games, I'm not particularly great at them. Shmups are one of those game genres that require lots of practice and replays to master, and that can be off-putting to a lot of players who are looking to get into the genre. They have this lovable arcadey feel to them, they're usually not very long from start to finish, so they demand a lot out of you to get all the way to the end, and as a result, you're dying and retrying over and over again in the hopes that you can get just a little bit farther and beat stages just a little bit cleaner than before. There's a satisfaction that comes from overcoming that challenge, but losing over and over can be pretty demoralizing for new players, and it can make it difficult to muster up the courage to turn the game back on. However, while some of these elements might make shmups difficult to approach, the satisfaction of overcoming that challenge to advance to the next stage is pretty crucial too. Platypus Reclayed aims at balancing these two experiences, and I think it accomplishes this pretty well. Reclayed is a remake of the 2002 PC game Platypus, complete with new clay art for essentially everything you see on your screen. The clay models give the original Platypus a timeless look that has aged incredibly well. With an art style this unique, it is a daunting task to remake this sort of game and not lose the graphical charm that the original had. But Platypus Reclayed has been recreated in such a reverent, detail-oriented way that it retains all of the charm of the original and then some. The game's original creator, Anthony Flack, painstakingly remade the entire game in clay, and everything molds together wonderfully in the final game. The models look so on point, you'd think he still had the originals from 2002 locked in some kind of anti-aging chamber and broke them out 23 years later. There's something so satisfying about all the details in this game, from the scrolling backgrounds as you fly through levels to the stop-motion animation of watching this building crumble as you shoot through it. As somebody who is typically pretty skeptical of remakes, especially remakes of games with unique art styles, the team at Claymatic should be incredibly proud of their accomplishments in bringing this game's art style to life in a way that celebrates the original. Seeing Flack carve out these clay models of the different ships is endearing, and these different ships are also one of the best additions that Reclayed makes to the original. So the original Platypus game is a fairly standard horizontal shooter. Blast enemies, grab power-ups, don't get hit by bullets, etc. All of this is fairly standard fare for the genre. There's a good amount of enemy variety across this game's 5 levels, and partially thanks to the art style, their attack patterns are pretty predictable and fun to combat. However, when you're first starting out in the original, it can be a little bit daunting dying in one hit on such a small screen so frequently. Platypus Reclayed handles this in a few different ways. Firstly, the game is presented in full widescreen compared to the 4:3 resolution of the original. With so much more screen real estate, you have a lot more space to move around and tackle enemies. However, this does not make the screen feel barren. Quite the contrary, really. You have more freedom in how you want to approach fighting enemies, but this also means that they spend more time on screen, so they're still posing constant threats to you. Additionally, Platypus Reclayed adds 2 new ship types to the game. The original ship now has the ability to tank an extra hit. As long as you have a power-up, you'll simply power down instead of dying immediately. It adds a great safety net for new players. Sometimes the screen can get so busy that it becomes really difficult to see tiny bullets through the clay smoke of destroyed enemies. Now, those small mistakes aren't punished so harshly, although losing your power-up is a pretty devastating loss. If you want even more of a safety net, the beginner ship is likely your speed. This gives you an extra shield per life that allows you to take a hit and retain your power-up first. So technically, you can take 2 hits before you go down. If you're just getting into this genre, this will likely be the ship for you. It allows the game to retain its challenge and constant barrage of attacks, but players can opt into a safety net to progress a little bit more smoothly. However, if you still want that one-hit challenge of the original, the advanced ship provides just that. This works in tandem with the game's toggleable difficulty settings, so if you want the authentic shmup experience with a little more room for error, you can pick a harder difficulty with the beginner ship. If you want less intense enemy attacks but learn better through immediate punishment, you can choose the advanced ship and a lower difficulty. It's really up to your preference. Platypus Reclayed provides a lot of options that allow you to fine-tune the game's difficulty to something that works for you, so you can experience the game's levels at a pace that works best, which I think is commendable. Like I mentioned earlier, Platypus Reclayed is a fairly standard side-scrolling shooter, outside of its art style, of course. The power-ups in this game are not dissimilar from other genre staples. You've got your wide shot, your rapid fire, your close-range sonic blast, rockets, etc. Platypus Reclayed adds tons of new power-ups into the mix, from a fireball to a boxing glove to donuts and cheese. These cute little power-ups feel reminiscent of some of the genre's more wacky entries, where you're throwing jelly beans or beaming ice cream at enemies. The unique mechanic in Platypus is that your power-ups are on a timer, so even if you don't get hit, if your timer runs out, you'll lose your power-up and get downgraded back to your standard blaster. This ideally forces you to constantly chain together star pickups to keep your counter high and not lose your power-up, but in practice, I think it makes you lose necessary and valuable abilities arbitrarily. In other shmups, you typically get to keep your abilities as long as you survive with them, rewarding smart, defensive play. This power-up system tries to reward more aggressive play, which I typically like, but this mechanic sometimes feels like a punishment for no reason if you're in an area of the game with no star pickups and your power-up just runs out. This is especially detrimental in boss fights. While your normal blaster is pretty weak, it does just fine on the regular enemies for the most part. However, fighting bosses with just your regular weapons is a slog. The bosses have tons of health and can take a while to go down, even when you're blasting them with rockets, but if you're just working with the standard blaster, you'd better clear your schedule. In general, the boss designs leave a bit to be desired in my opinion. In most of the game's levels, they feel like big damage sponges that take a long time to beat, but don't really provide a lot of challenge in their actual attack patterns. They're more of a test of endurance rather than a fast-paced back and forth, except for the final boss. I won't show it just for spoilers if you're interested in playing this game for yourself, but I will say that I think it was the best designed boss in the game. Its design was much more intricate and encouraged you to bounce back and forth a lot more as you fight it. The stages themselves are designed well, especially the ones found later in the game, which are filled with unique enemies and are an absolute blast to fly through. Some levels, like this minefield one, encourage some more cautious, meticulous play, and the new boxing glove power-up fits perfectly into this level's design. But levels like this are the lower point of the game in my personal opinion. I prefer the majority of levels where you're blasting your way through the hordes of different visually distinct enemies and reacting to their shots. Levels like the minefield and the volcano shower are more visually busy and less of an exercise in back and forth battling, and more so a reaction to falling rocks or floating mines. The rock level in particular is really distracting. There are all these rocks falling in the background, but only the light brown ones are actually in the playfield and damage you. The effect looks really cool visually, especially just watching footage back, but when you're playing, it can be a bit tough to discern which rocks are in which plane in a split second. This could be remedied fairly easily, maybe with an option for folks with color blindness to cover these rocks in white ash or something so they can be more easily spotted. This game is already fairly robust with options, allowing you to change the color of your ship and such, so I'm sure players will find the combinations that work best for them and help them distinguish everything going on easily. Hey, it's hard to tell sometimes when there's fish all over the screen. Platypus Reclayed does more than modernize an already timeless art style. It gives players a lot of tools to fine-tune the game's challenge to their liking, which enables it to serve as a great entry point for players who might be daunted by the typically punishing nature of these games. However, this doesn't mean that Platypus Reclayed is easy by any means. It gives you tools to make the experience more forgiving or more challenging at your discretion, so you get to opt into some additional safety nets if you want without undermining the game's design or challenge. If you're already a huge fan of shmups, I don't think that Platypus Reclayed offers much that you likely haven't seen in other side-scrolling shooters already, outside of the delightful art, of course. However, it does provide a good amount of fun, classic shooter gameplay if you've been looking for a new game to scratch that itch. And hey, if you want the original experience, Reclayed includes the 2002 game as well, so you get to have both the modern and classic experiences. At $15, I think Platypus Reclayed is a great bargain for anybody looking to get into this genre, and I really look forward to seeing what Claymatic creates next in this art style, hopefully including even more clay hot dogs. Thanks to Claymatic for providing me with a copy of this game to review, and thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy this straightforward review type video. I had fun making it, and I'd love love to hear if you enjoyed it. Big thanks to my channel members for supporting my work as always, and thank you for watching, liking, commenting, all that. I hope you have a great rest of your day.